Lovin'. This is Kevin, and this is episode number 13. In just a minute, I have an interview with Dollar Vigilante Jeff Berwick of thedollarvigilante.com, and we talk about escaping the dollar collapse and also considering escaping the Western economies, including the U.S., and possibly living somewhere down in South America or Mexico or a greener pasture. So it's a little different interview because I've talked about being a permanent traveler or a perpetual tourist and being able to live where you want. But he shed some light on the idea of actually moving out and heading south. And this podcast is sponsored by 100mustreads.com. Speed up your business knowledge and download summaries of over 120 of the top business books, starting at just $25 total, by going to 100mustreads.com. Also, if you go to freedomlovin.com, you can get the 7 practical tips on living free in an unfree world. And that's a mini course that I set up, so you just put your name and email address, and you'll get those sent to you right away. Also, I wanted to thank the anonymous donator. I got a donation, and this is actually going back to June, because I hadn't even checked my Bitcoin account, but somebody in June donated of 0.46 of a Bitcoin, and that's about, today I think Bitcoin's about $107, so it's about $50. So really appreciate that. Whoever you are, thanks so much for your donation, and that's awesome. And if you like this podcast, you can donate. There's a donation button on the homepage of freedomlovin.com. But also, even better would be if you could leave a rating and a review on iTunes. So I'll have the iTunes link in the show notes for this show, and that's again at freedomlovin.com, and you can just click on that and leave me a rating and review. That would help tremendously. So that's about it for this week. Have a great week, and go out there and build some freedom. And here's my interview with Jeff Berwick. All right, well, I'm thrilled to have Jeff Berwick on the show today. Jeff is the founder of The Dollar Vigilante, which is about surviving and prospering during and after the dollar collapse. He's also the CEO of TDV Media and Services and host of the popular video podcast Anarchast. Jeff is a prominent speaker at many of the world's freedom, investment, and gold conferences, as well as regularly in the media, including CNBC, CNN, and Fox Business. And his sites are thedollarvigilante.com and anarchast.com. Jeff, welcome to Freedom Lovin'.
Thank you, Kevin. Great to be here.
Sure. Yeah, so I wanted to ask you right away, so can you talk about the businesses that you've been involved with? And, of course, the question that you ask all your guests, how did you become an anarchist?
Sure. I guess they both are sort of tied in. I started off with a internet company in Canada in 1994 called stockhouse.com, which is still the top financial website in Canada. And by the end of the year 99, or around 2000, it was worth about $240 million. And a few weeks later, it was worth almost nothing. And so I started on a long voyage of trying to figure out how this financial economic system works. And I'd always been curious in how the political system worked too. And I had no idea because obviously I went to some public indoctrination camps. I spent 12 years in school being educated by the government. So I didn't know anything about money or banking or how actually the government really works. And so I decided at that point just to buy a catamaran and try to sail around the world and try to see if I could figure out all these things. And along the way, I sort of did. And first I came across Austrian economics, which explained the tech bubble and explained future bubbles, including the housing bubble and the current government debt bubble. And I also came across all the information on liberty and freedom. And I realized, because I'd always been searching, I was always wondering, why are there always wars? Why is there always poverty? Why are there these kind of problems in the world? And I could never figure it out until I realized all those problems are actually just caused by collectivism and the government or the state. So I spent many years, 10 years, I still, to this day, still reading all the time, learning about all the problems that these collectivist ideas cause. And of course, central banks are are created by or are enabled by the government. And without central banks, there wouldn't be all of these economic problems, especially depressions and recessions, which wouldn't actually really exist in a free market, at least not for very long at all, unless something highly unusual happened. And I also realized that all the problems that we have today, or not all, but many of the major problems, are caused by collectivism and statism and trying to do a top-down approach, much like the Soviet Union, and try to plan the economy and try to plan the way that people live, plan their social lives, plan enforce through violence what people can do with their own bodies. So that's really how I got started. And then what happened after that was I realized I kind of knew what I was talking about and thought I better tell some more people about this because to me it was very interesting and I think very important. And so I started dollarvigilante.com and I just started talking about all these topics. And along the way I also, I would say to people, well, I think the dollar is going to collapse. I think actually all these Western nation states are going to have some form of collapse. Actually, it's pretty much impossible for them not to with all the debt that they've gone into socialism, and democracy is a terrible anti-freedom movement. And so people said, well, what should we do about it? So there wasn't very many solutions. So I started up many different companies. I'm a little bit of a serial entrepreneur. I like providing productivity and wealth to the world and providing value to people. So I started up something called tdbpassports.com where we help people get foreign citizenships. And then we even just started a libertarian enclave in Chile called Gulch Chile, where we're inviting people to come down and start a new life in a much freer country. It's a lot freer in Chile. Well, that goes without saying, with the U.S. being one of the least free countries on earth, but it is one of the most free countries on earth at the moment, and so that's why we chose to go down there. And so, yeah, those are some of the things I've been doing, and along the way, as I mentioned, I just realized that I don't believe in violence, I don't believe in theft, I don't believe those should be used against people, and I don't believe you should initiate violence against anyone, and in its very essence means I'm an anarchist.
Absolutely. So now I'm curious about your journey that you took. You left Europe and Canada, and then you left and took off kind of around the world, and then you went and saw like a whole bunch of countries. And how was it that influenced you and your thinking at that point?
Well, it really influenced me a lot, and I knew it would. I knew just by my instinct that CBC in Canada, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, run by the government news agency, was not telling me all the information that was out there, and obviously it's all propaganda. So I knew there was going to be a lot to be learned, but I didn't know what I was going to learn, and I ended up visiting nearly 100 countries. I actually sank my boat in El Salvador, but I just kept going by backpack, plane, train, and automobile for the next 4 or 5 years. And visited many places. And what you realize is the world is much different than what the Western media and governments portray. In fact, like Doug Casey, some of my favorite places to visit are whatever the State Department has a warning about.
Yeah, exactly.
Mexico is a good example. I'm sitting in a place that the State Department has a warning about right now in Acapulco. It's a beautiful place. It's wonderful. It's very free. There is some issues, but they generally don't happen in the touristy or more wealthier areas where anyone from the West would ever live. And in fact, any problem that's been caused here has all been caused by the U.S. war on people or plants, or as they call them, drugs. And so again, it's the government messing with things and causing problems, and then they come in and try to say they're the solution to it. They're a self-licking ice cream cone.
Yeah, and you mentioned that drugs are actually legal in Mexico. Is that right? Like all drugs are legal?
Yeah, all plants, because they're not really drugs, most of them, except for things like meth and things like that, which actually are chemicals. But marijuana is just a plant. Cocaine is basically just a plant that's been processed somewhat. Yes, all plants and chemicals are legal for personal possession in Mexico. Not many people realize it. Mexico is a very much freer country than the U.S. Of course, however, they're under a lot of pressure from the U.S. and they get a lot of money. The government here, which is not a great government either, there is no good government on earth, gets a lot of money to send out people with machine guns and just start shooting people who get caught selling plants or distributing or transporting plants and causing lots of problems. But most things here are legal. In fact, you can, in Acapulco, if you actually do want some marijuana, a lot of times you just go up and ask a police officer.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. You mainly live in Acapulco, or you have a couple of different places?
I live something called the permanent traveler theory or perpetual tourist or prior taxpayer, PT theory.
Right.
And I live that way because I want to be as free as possible. And that's the best way to be free in the world today is to not really live full-time in any one country so that they can't legally say that you reside there. So I live as a tourist wherever I am. So I live as a tourist in Mexico. I live as a tourist in Chile when I'm down there. I'm actually a resident of a Caribbean country, but I'm really never there. And the reason I'm a resident there is because they have no taxes that apply to me. Mm-hmm. And so that's the way I've been living now for almost 10 years. And it's fantastic. Legally, I don't have to pay taxes anywhere. I don't have any governments really bothering me because actually governments treat tourists quite well because they see them as bringing wealth into the country. Right. They treat the people who actually live there very poorly, as people in the U.S. know with the law enforcers. They used to be peace officers. Now they're law enforcers, will constantly be trying to trap you or stop you or find you doing something like going over an arbitrary speed limit and then extorting you for money. And then, of course, don't even get into taxes, where in the U.S. there's tax rates over 50%, including state and local taxes. And that's not even including things like property tax and all the other taxes, alcohol tax, gas tax, sales tax. It really adds up to well more than 50% in the U.S. So it's a very, very unfree place. And because of that, I live as a tourist. And in many countries, you actually, as a tourist, you get a lot of those taxes back. You get sales taxes back and things like that. So it's a great way to live.
Yeah, I've actually talked about this on the podcast in the past. I had Steve Michaels on, and we got into the whole PT lifestyle. And one thing that comes up a lot when I talk to people about this is that they think it's this life of just constantly going from place to place and being, really being a tourist. But do you think it's more of like a mindset of being PT and being able to do that? Because, if you are somebody that's, kind of stuck in one place for one reason or another, you could still become a PT and take advantage of a lot of those things, right?
Yeah, it's a lot easier than it sounds. I'll give you an example. In Mexico, whenever you enter Mexico, if you're American or Canadian or a European, you get a 6-month tourist visa upon entry. So you're allowed to stay here for 6 months. And then if you leave for even an hour, you just walk across the border in Tijuana to San Diego and come back, then you have another 6 months. There's many countries as well where they really just don't care that much about even if you overstay your tourist visa. Argentina, for example, I know people who have stayed there for 10 years. You're only supposed to stay 3 months. And they really don't say anything. They're like, well, you kind of overstayed that quite a bit. And the people just shrugged their shoulders and they went, well, next time don't do that, okay? A lot of these countries aren't as militarized or police state as the U.S. And even in Mexico, here's a tip for people. If you overstay your tourist visa in Mexico, and you can do that, no problem, all you have to do is fly up to Tijuana and walk across the border to San Diego. They actually have no one checking at that border how long you've been in Mexico. There's no Mexican officials checking you on your way out. So you could theoretically stay here for as long as you want and then just walk across the border at any point, and that's that. Now, of course, there is some slight risks.
So as far as, people now in America, I talk to people about this stuff all the time, and a lot of times it's like trying to convince them that they're not free or convince them that there are better places out there. Why should they care? There's so many nice things about living in America or North America and, kind of having a peaceful lifestyle, so to speak.
Well, it all depends on where you live and what you actually want out of life. Of course, if you live in the middle of nowhere, a lot of the places are quite peaceful and calm. However, you're still going to have to pay a very large amount of tax. And I guess if you don't mind being armed robbed every single year for 30 to 60% of your money, then I guess you're happy doing that. I call them happy slaves. But, it's all up to what people want if there's certain things. However, what I've found traveling the world is there's much better places to live. I love living in Mexico. There's really, when I go to the U.S., especially some of the larger areas, New York or Los Angeles or any big city, it's just constant problems. There's always police bothering me about something. There's always fights and things happening and bars telling you at what time you have to leave and all kinds of rules and restrictions. Now, some people might not mind that or might not care about that, and that's fine. I prefer to be in a place where people don't tell me what to do all the time and there's not all these these rules and restrictions, and it actually creates a much better atmosphere to live in freer places. So I really enjoy Mexico. Most people are very happy here, no matter how much money they're making or not making. It's just a much better, more open and happy lifestyle. But yeah, if you're living in the middle of nowhere or some small town and you know the sheriff and he's your buddy and they don't bother you and you don't mind paying all these taxes and you don't mind all the other rules and regulations, then yeah, it might be okay. However, the one thing I would say to them is the U.S. is going to collapse in one way or another in the next 5 years, and it's going to be quite messy. And so I wouldn't get too apathetic to, oh, it's been good in my little area here for the last 20 years, so I'm sure it'll be good for the next 20 years. That definitely won't be the case because the dollar is going to collapse. The U.S. government's probably going to try to cling on to control for a while. You can see them buying billions of hollow point bullets. They're buying tens of thousands of tanks right now. Once they turn off those welfare EBT cards, there's going to be basically World War Z happening all over the U.S. There's just all those zombies are going to be out there just stealing and killing people. And I'm not joking about this. This is going to happen. So what's happened is the last 40 years since the U.S. went off the gold standard, they've been quite lucky in that the rest of the world has accepted U.S. dollars. So a lot of Americans have really lived off of basically what I call a false economy. Mm-hmm. And that's all going to collapse in the next few years. And it's going to be a very, very much different place. They're opening up FEMA camps that apparently can hold up to 50 million people. They're getting ready for a complete societal and civil collapse and civil chaos. And I really think that's going to be the case. So I wouldn't get too apathetic. I think just like the founding fathers of the U.S. went to the U.S., 300 years ago, I think many people should be looking to do that now as things get worse and worse, to flee a place that's collapsing, that's becoming more oppressive, and find a place that's freer. And there's lots of places around the world. I've chosen Mexico and Chile as two of my favorite, but there's plenty more that we write about at FL013.com all the time. There's places like the former Soviet Union. There's some satellite states that are doing quite well, including Estonia and Latvia. Then there's places in Asia that are quite free. Thailand is very free, and Cambodia is incredibly free. You can basically do anything you want there, and they're all growing. That's going to be the big thing. So the U.S. is going on a downward slope. It cannot be stopped at this point. There's too much debt, and it's going to get nothing but worse and worse economically, politically, socially for the next few years. And so I prefer just to be in a place that's actually growing. And once you're around something like that, for example, in Chile, it's just booming right now, and it's actual real growth. They don't have a Keynesian central bank, and the amount of economic activity is tremendous, and the amount of opportunity is tremendous. Whereas in the U.S. today, to open a lemonade stand, John Stossel of Fox did a study on it. It took him 4 months and about $60,000 for all the permits and regulations to open a child's lemonade stand. So the old land of opportunity is not there anymore. And if what you're looking for is opportunity, I suggest you look to get out now rather than later, because it's going to get much, much harder. I see the U.S. government closing doors, and every week they're closing a door. For example, when Edward Savarin of Facebook, he left the U.S. to become a citizen of Singapore, saving himself about $1 billion in capital gains taxes, the U.S. government immediately tried to pass a law called the Anti-Expatriation Act. And what that's saying is they don't want you to be able to leave, especially if you have money. And if you do want to leave, they're going to take most of your money. So this is going to get worse and worse as the U.S. government's finances get worse and worse. And so it's going to be much easier to leave now than leave later. But what you can do is just start. Maybe just get some of your assets outside of the U.S. for now. So you at least, if it starts to collapse, you have some options. Or maybe if you have the kind of assets, get a second place, a condo or a home somewhere else in a freer country. And if things start to get worse and worse, you at least have a second option.
Yeah, and this leads into, I wanted to talk about Galt's Chile, which is, to me, is like, on paper, it looks really exciting and interesting and something that I would definitely want to be a part of. And I've got friends, too, that are really curious about it. So what exactly is it? What's Galt's Chile? And who are the type of people that you see moving there or that are already starting to move into the area?
Yeah, we identified Chile as being one of the better countries to be in for the next few years. Their government has no debt. This is totally foreign to U.S. subjects, of course. The government has no debt, no deficits. The taxation is not great, but there's lots of ways legally around it all, especially if you're a foreigner. So you could really arrange your affairs so you're paying little or no tax in Chile. Their central bank isn't printing a lot of money. They're not Keynesian. They're actually from the Chicago School or Friedmanites, which isn't the best is no central bank, obviously, but if you're going to have one, that's a better one. And so it's absolutely booming. They have very low regulation. You can do almost anything there. You can open a company in one day over the internet. They actually have grants for entrepreneurs to come to Chile right now and start up a business. They'll actually give you money to go there. So this is the way the government's thinking. The government is actually, a lot of them are followers of Ayn Rand, and that's where we've got the name Galt's Gulch from, is from her book Atlas Shrugged, which talked about a world that had become very oppressive, high tax, high regulation, and really punished the producers. And so in her book, the producers all actually went to a place where you're at right now in Colorado. But nowadays, with what's going on in the U.S. government, we don't see any place in the U.S. as being safe for freedom lovers for the next 10 years. And well, you just look at Bradley Manning and Edward Snowden and even Adam Kokesh. These are people who are trying to slow down this oppressive government, and they're all being treated as enemies of the state. So you don't, as a freedom activist, or even just a person who believes in freedom, it's becoming more and more dangerous to be there. And so we found this place in Chile, and it's beautiful. It's amazing. It's about an hour from the capital city, which is very modern. It's almost turning into like a Hong Kong, Santiago. That's 1 hour to the east. 1 hour to the west is the ocean, Pacific Ocean, with Viña del Mar, which is the nicest by far beach resort area, large city actually itself in South America. It's beautiful. Both of them are full of just the best of the best. The economy is doing so well. There's so much opportunity. So yeah, we found this place right in the middle. It's actually in a gulch. It's surrounded by mountains. It's actually in the wine growing area of Chile, which is very famous, called Casablanca. And we are trying to attract people, and I have quite a large audience of freedom lovers, and we already have thousands and thousands who have said they want to move down there. When they move down, it's going to be a different story, because obviously everyone has their own different time frames, but thousands have contacted us and said they want to move down. We've already had hundreds of people wanting to buy lots. We just started selling lots recently, and the people we're attracting down there are amazing. They're very freedom-minded. Many of them homeschool or unschool their children. Their children are incredibly smart. They're all entrepreneurial-minded. Not all, but most. Many of them believe in, many are actually doctors who can't actually practice the kind of practice they want to do in the U.S. because they're trying things that are natural and organic and leading edge, cutting edge. And many of them are getting kicked out of the U.S. There's many doctors who have found cures for cancer in the U.S. and they've been shut down by the U.S. government because the U.S. government it's a fascist government that works with the pharmaceutical companies to make sure that no cures for anything ever get found, so that they can just keep pumping all kinds of toxic chemicals into everyone's bloodstream every day. So many people are just moving down there and trying to create a new world. I really call Chile sort of the new America. It's sort of like America 100 years ago, and it's almost like Ellis Island. And many people are just taking a chance and going down there. And there's so many of us down there now that it's really easy. And we've actually got people, and if you're thinking about coming down, you want to take a trip, just check it out. You can just email us or call us at the Galt's Gulch website at galtsgulchchile.com, or get involved on TDV, which is the Dollar Vigilante. Just go to dollarvigilante.com, a $15 a month subscription, and you have access to all of our TDV groups around the world who are all expats who will help you if you want to come somewhere. For example, in Chile, we have Ken Carpenter. He'll take you around. He'll show you things. He'll give you advice on what hotels or what condos to rent or where to stay. So we're really just trying to help free slaves from the West get out and make it as easy as possible for them.
Yeah, so now in terms of the type of people, you mentioned a lot of freedom lovers. Is it kind of all ages, or what are we looking at? I mean, somebody that's like in their 20s now and looking to start their career or just kind of get going with something, do you think it's a good idea for them to just jump down there and start learning Spanish and live in Galt's Gulch?
Definitely, yeah. We've got all kinds of age groups. The age groups really range. We've had people under 18 years old who say they want to move down. We've had people 80 and 90-year-olds who are still actually practicing doctors who all want to move down. We've got a phenomenal amount of range of ages. There's families, young families that have already moved down, who I know personally. So it's a tremendous group of people. And once you're around these kind of people, any kind of things can happen because it's a lot of entrepreneurial-minded, productive people who are looking for ideas, looking to add value, looking to produce wealth, looking to live a freer life. Many are going down. They want to do organic farming, and that's all we want to do at Galt's Gulch. We don't have a ton of rules there, being quite libertarian, but we won't allow any GMO seeds on our property. So it's all very organic, and we're actually really trying to get most people to do their own farming on their own land at Galt's Gulch. And we actually have services where if they buy the seeds, we actually can provide the workers, and we get a cut of whatever's produced. And of course, the owner of the property gets the majority of the cut, plus all the food they want as well. So we're doing all these kinds of things down there.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. And how many people do you expect to be living there?
Well, it's really developing. We're still purchasing land down there because we've had so much interest. If we do our total amount, we'll end up with 65 square kilometers of land, which is half the size of Santiago. Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of the full total potential. But we'll see what happens. As it goes, it'll all develop. It's all happening organically.
Cool. Now, as far as Chile goes, it sounds really cool. I just have my doubts, and I'm a little bit skeptical on what will happen in the future. And do you think that it's pretty good right now, but couldn't it be the case where in a couple of years, in a few years, they start, the economy's booming, the government's collecting all this tax money, and they start putting in some of the measures that like the U.S. government's doing now, and suddenly you have like kind of the same situation as what's going on up here?
Yeah, that's totally possible, but these things tend to happen fairly slowly. And, you look at the U.S., it took about 100 years for it to really get really oppressive. So these things don't happen overnight, and it's a small country. It has 14 million people in it, and I really don't expect any massive, horrible things to happen in the next 10 years there, or even 20 years probably, but anything's possible. And yeah, this is the sad part of the world we live in today, is that you have to always be aware of these things and be prepared to move if the local government gets too oppressive. But hopefully, my hope is in the next 10 or 20 years, we actually don't have governments anymore. I think a lot of this concept of collectivism will start to collapse. And as people start to realize that freedom and having less governments, or actually more governments, up to 7 billion governments, is the best way to go. And I think all that will happen over the next 10 or 20 years. So hopefully that will happen before anything gets too oppressive in Chile in the next few decades. Yeah,
that would be amazing to see. And I guess in the meantime, we just use the tools that we have and be PTs and be able to be flexible and move when it becomes necessary.
Yep.
Going back to a lot of people that listen to this show are, kind of in their 20s and 30s and trying to figure things out. What do you think? What would your advice be to somebody that, really not sure, like thinking start a career, start a business here in the U.S. or do something else? What would you say?
Well, it's really tough because it all depends on your own personal needs, wants, what your skills are, where you currently live. It's really tough to give general advice, but I would generally just say to a younger person, forget school for the most part. It's a waste of time for the most part, unless you really want to do something incredibly specialized and specific, like a heart surgeon or something like that. But you definitely don't need to go to school for your Bachelor of Arts or your business degree, where they don't really teach you anything for 4 years and you go into a lot of debt. I would say to younger people, just go out and do something. And not everyone's an entrepreneur either, so that also is a thing. But if you are entrepreneurial minded, or you think you are, just go out there and find something and try to do it. And that's the best education possible. And the other best education is travel. Once you see the opportunities in the rest of the world, you really realize that what is available to you. Whereas if you just stay in one place, you really get very close-minded, and you don't really seem to realize the opportunities that abound out there in the world. And many of them are outside the Western world today.
Yeah, definitely. Now, as far as the going and getting another passport or getting residency somewhere else, it sounds kind of difficult and confusing, and like there's just tons of red tape. And you have the advantage of being from Canada, where you don't have to pay that exit tax. So if as a U.S. citizen, you're kind of screwed no matter what you do. It's if you're living somewhere else, you still are required to pay taxes in the U.S. And then if you decide to leave, I believe there's another tax that they get you on if you want to become a citizen of another country.
Yeah, that's not totally true about Canada. When you do leave Canada, you do have to, if you have capital gains, let's say you have a house and you sell it, or even if you don't sell it, you have to pay whatever capital gains are owing at that time. So that is a form of you have to finalize all your extortion fees with the government there. But you're right that the Canadian people and most people in the world have it much better than the U.S., whereas an American, if they leave the U.S. and live anywhere else, they still have to pay U.S. taxes on anything over about $90,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And as far as the exit tax go, I believe you have to have more than $2 million in assets to hit that. So if you don't have that, you won't have to pay an exit tax. Of course, they're changing all these rules all the time, and that's why I suggest to people to look to get out sooner rather than later, because I'm sure they'll make it more and more harder to get out. But yeah, and that's why we started up tdvpassports.com. So you can go, you can call us or email us, so we can give you a bit of advice on what might work best for you, which jurisdictions might work best for you. You're right, there is a lot of red tape in a lot of these countries, but we have agents in each of the countries that we work with to make it much, much easier. I tried to do it on my own about 6 or 7 years ago in Dominican Republic, and it was a bit of a nightmare. And that's when I realized I should start up a company helping people to do these things, because you can get ripped off. You don't understand the local language sometimes. You don't know the right people and that sort of a thing. And so it's much better just to use someone who's got a reputation of having helped many people in many different countries and give you good advice and help you through the process.
Sure. So kind of shift of topic, but one thing that actually is a pretty common theme among the Liberty crowd that wants to travel and get out there and see other places and become a PT is the whole idea of dating. And that just becomes kind of problematic when you're moving around, like, every few months or something. Do you have any takes on that? I mean, I think I heard that you're married. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
How did you meet your wife? And what's the story behind that?
Well, I actually met her in Acapulco about 5 years ago, and I basically sort of been with her ever since then. And yeah, we're married now. And what we do, she's Mexican, so she just lives here most of the time, and so do my kids, because they don't really make any income, so it's not a big deal that they have to be a PT, but I make a lot of income, so I just don't live here as a citizen or a resident even, and because of that, I don't have to pay taxes. So there's all kinds of ways around these things, and it's not as hard as you think. And as far as dating and things like that go, what I've found is when you travel, you pretty quickly meet people, especially in a lot of countries like Thailand or Mexico. It's pretty much impossible not to leave some of these countries without being married to somebody. So,
that's a good point. Yeah, I found that that sometimes is an excuse I've heard from people, like, I can't travel, I need to meet somebody and settle down. And I found that I actually meet a lot more people when I'm out on the road, like visiting new places or for whatever reason.
Oh, absolutely. It's a million times easier to meet people because all of a sudden you're sort of an interesting, cool new person. Whereas if you just stay in your town where you've been forever and everyone knows you're not that exciting. If you show up in Cambodia and, a lot of the girls there will be like, "Whoa, you're from the U.S. Tell me about it." It's very easy to meet people. And plus you tend to meet a lot of other fellow travelers, and a lot of them seem to be very open-minded as well. And they'll invite you to their houses and stuff. All kinds of amazing things happen when you travel. Whereas if you just stick around where you're from, things tend to get a little mundane and boring.
Yeah, I totally agree. So with all this gloom and doom about the USSA, how much time do you think we have, and what gives you hope that, for our future?
Well, I don't have much hope for the U.S. for the next 5 or 10 years. Although, if you look at Detroit's an interesting situation. They've gone bankrupt, and so basically all their public services have stopped. And what's happened is the private market has come in to fill in those needs, and they're doing a much better job than police were doing with private security agencies. There's private policing agencies that are doing an amazing job. But Detroit is just a city. Once the whole country and once the dollar collapses, I think it's going to be quite chaotic for a while. But I also think there will be a lot of opportunity, but it will be very dangerous. So I'd rather not be there during the collapse. I'd rather come right after the collapse once it's starting to settle down and then come in and find opportunities. But I'm really optimistic. I think all these governments are bankrupt now, and I think the idea of government is terrible. I think it's caused almost all the major problems on Earth for the last few hundred years. So I think it's going to be a very great future. And all I'm trying to do is try to stay in places where it's going to be more comfortable to get through this collapse collapse of the monetary system and anything that happens with it. And so that's why I spend most of my time in places like Chile and Mexico. Mexico, their peso collapsed in the 90s, so they're already kind of used to that kind of thing. So it's not going to be a huge, major issue. Chile has a booming economy. I think they'll do quite well. They have a lot of agriculture, so they'll survive quite well for whatever period of time it takes in the transition. And I think once we get through the transition, there'll be nothing but opportunity, but you have to get your assets through that transition, because the governments will continue to abscond your wealth until they've pretty much taken everyone's wealth in your own home country. So you just want to get out of there for a while, get your assets out of there. And then if you have assets after this collapse, and once there's a transition, there's going to be nothing but opportunity, and you can that's really when fortunes are made. You look at the Soviet Union, it was messy right after the collapse, but there's more billionaires who live in Moscow now than any other city on earth. A lot of them did it in sort of nefarious ways, sort of like Putin. They were all CIA guys, and they went in with guns and just took copper mines and stuff. But that's the kind of stuff that might happen during this collapse, and we'll see what happens. But there is a lot of opportunity at the same time.
Cool. That sounds really exciting. I'm definitely going to hit you up about the Gulch thing. Is that something that's going to be ready in next year? Or?
Well, we just started sales, so people will start building probably in the next few months. So yeah, it'll take some time, but yeah, you probably should see some people actually really living there in the next year or so, and it'll just grow from there.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that wraps up everything. Thanks, Jeff, so much for coming on. And best of luck to you in the future. And I'm sure I'll be seeing you around. I saw you at Libertopia last year. You going to be making it down to San Diego again?
Yep, making it up for me, yes.
Up. Yeah, there you go.
It's easy for me. From Acapulco, I just fly direct to Tijuana, and I can just walk across the border, and I'm there. So that's a nice, easy one for me.
Oh, awesome. Cool. So again, it's Jeff Berwick, and his website is thedollarvigilante.com, and you can listen to his podcast at anarchast.com. Is that right?
That's correct.
Cool. Well, again, Jeff, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure, Kevin. Take care.